Have you ever looked across the dinner table at the person you love most in the world and wondered what they are truly hiding? We all have secrets. We all have thoughts we keep locked away in the dark, dusty corners of our minds, things we would never dare to say out loud. But some secrets don't just break hearts. They destroy entire realities. They end lives. Imagine building a perfect life, brick by brick, for 25 long years, only to discover that the very foundation you stood on was made of sand and betrayal. Imagine the ultimate backstab, not by a stranger on the street, but by the two people you trusted more than anyone else on God's green earth, the ones who were supposed to protect you. Welcome to Secret Confessions. Today, I am taking you to a sun-drenched, multi-million-dollar estate in the heart of California. We are going to a garden party that was supposed to celebrate a beautiful family milestone, a graduation. But instead, that manicured lawn became the stage for the most devastating and deadly revelation you could ever imagine. This is a story about the high price of a 20-year lie. Robert thought he had won the lottery of life. He was the classic American success story, a man who believed in hard work, unwavering loyalty, and putting family above absolutely everything else. By the time he hit 50, Robert had built a powerhouse real estate firm from the ground up. It wasn't easy. It was decades of early mornings, sleepless nights, and taking massive risks to build an empire for his girls. But if you asked Robert what his greatest achievement was, he wouldn't tell you about his diversified portfolio or his luxury cars. He would point, with his eyes beaming with pride, to his wife Evelyn and his beautiful 22-year-old daughter, Mia. Evelyn was the definition of elegance. From the day they met in their 20s, Robert treated her like a queen. She was the perfect partner, always supportive, always by his side at every charity gala and corporate dinner. They had been married for 25 years, and Robert still looked at her with the same blind, puppy-love adoration he felt on their wedding day. He built that California mansion as a sanctuary for her. He filled her closet with silk and her jewelry box with diamonds. He wanted her to never have a single worry in the world. And then there was Mia, the light of his life. Since the moment he held her in that delivery room, Robert's heart belonged to her. He was the dad who coached every soccer game, the dad who sat at the kitchen table helping with math homework until midnight. He was the father who paid for her elite private college tuition without a second thought, always with a smile on his face. He loved his family with a fierce, protective devotion. Nothing mattered more than keeping his two girls safe and happy. And right beside Robert, through every high and every low, was David. David wasn't just a business partner. He was Robert's college roommate, his confidant, and his absolute best friend. They were brothers in every way that mattered. They started the company in a cramped, sweaty garage, eating ramen and dreaming of the big leagues. When the money finally started rolling in, they shared the success, the profits, and the headaches equally. David was the best man at Robert's wedding, and to Mia, he was simply Uncle David. He was a permanent fixture at Thanksgiving, Christmas mornings, and summer barbecues. Robert trusted David with his money, his business, and his life. If anyone had suggested that he should doubt David, Robert would have laughed them out of the room. He felt truly blessed to have a brotherhood so pure. He believed he was the luckiest man alive. It was a warm, flawless Saturday afternoon in late May. The California sky was an impeccable blue, without a single cloud in sight. Robert and Evelyn were hosting a massive garden party at their estate to celebrate Mia's graduation from college. The lawn was perfectly manicured. Elegant white tents swayed in the gentle breeze. The catering staff moved like clockwork, carrying silver trays of chilled champagne and expensive hors d'oeuvres. A string quartet played soft, classical music near the infinity pool. 100 of their closest friends, family members, and high-profile associates were mingling and laughing. The atmosphere was joyful, light, and absolutely perfect. Robert stood on the patio, wearing a tailored navy blazer, holding a crystal glass. He watched Evelyn laughing with her friends, her red silk dress shimmering in the sun. He looked at Mia, who was radiant, talking to her classmates. Robert felt a wave of gratitude so deep it almost brought tears to his eyes. This was the pinnacle. Everything he had worked for was right here, safe and perfect. The big moment was only minutes away. Robert was scheduled to give the legendary Father of the Graduate toast. He had spent weeks crafting the perfect speech, a beautiful reflection on the passage of time, on unconditional love, and how proud he was of the woman Mia had become. He wanted to record the moment. He wanted to capture the crowd's reaction, the look on Mia's face, the smile on Evelyn's. But as he reached into his pocket, he realized his phone was nearly dead. The battery icon was flashing red, seconds away from shutting down. He waved to Evelyn, gesturing that he'd be right back, and slipped inside the massive, quiet house. He walked toward the great room, the sudden silence inside a sharp contrast to the lively party outside. The air conditioning kept the house crisp and cool. His leather shoes clicked on the marble floors as he headed upstairs to his home office to find a charger. He was still rehearsing the lines of his speech in his head, smiling to himself. He turned into the hallway and entered his private office. The familiar scent of mahogany and leather filled his senses. The room was dim, with heavy curtains blocking the afternoon sun. He walked to his large oak desk, searching for a cable. He moved some files around, but the charger wasn't there. However, sitting right in the center of the desk was Evelyn's iPad. She must have left it there earlier that morning while finalizing the catering list. Robert looked at the device. He thought to himself that instead of wasting time looking for a cable and waiting for his phone to juice up, he could just use the iPad's camera to record the speech. It was such a simple, innocent, and logical decision. It was that tiny, microscopic nudge of fate that alters the course of a life forever. He tapped the screen to wake it up. The iPad wasn't locked. The screen illuminated, revealing that Evelyn hadn't closed the last app she was using. It wasn't a grocery list. It wasn't her email. It was a highly secure third-party cloud storage app, hidden deep within a folder of utility apps. It was something Robert had never seen on her device before. A digital vault, protected by layers of security that, in the chaotic rush of party preparations, Evelyn had tragically forgotten to lock. Human curiosity is a relentless force. It wasn't suspicion. Robert had no reason to doubt her. It was just a light, harmless curiosity. What was this hidden folder? He tapped the main directory. In a fraction of a second, Robert's entire universe stopped. The air was violently ripped from his lungs. Time ceased to exist. Gravity seemed to vanish. The folder was filled with hundreds, perhaps thousands of photos. Intimate photos. Explicit, passionate, raw, and undeniable photos. Photos of Evelyn and David. Robert blinked, trying to force his eyes to focus, thinking he was having some kind of bizarre hallucination. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe it was some kind of AI-generated nightmare. But no, they were there. His wife's face. His best friend's face. They were together in luxury hotel rooms that Robert recognized from their firm's business trips. The same trips where Evelyn claimed she was going on spa retreats with her girlfriends. They were together on secluded beaches. They were in the back of David's car. And, in the most stomach-turning image of all, they were in Robert's own bed, the bed he paid for, in the room where he slept every single night. Robert's hands began to shake, a violent, uncontrollable tremor that traveled up his arms and gripped his throat. A cold, oily sweat broke out on his forehead. He could hear his own heart hammering against his ribs, a dull, rapid thumping that drowned out any noise from the garden. His breath became shallow. He felt like he was suffocating. He began opening the text logs archived with the photos. Messages detailing how they would sneak away while Robert was buried in spreadsheets and meetings. Messages laughing at him. Messages where Evelyn complained that Robert was boring and predictable, and that David was the true love of her life. They debated Robert's schedule to know exactly how much time they had in the empty house. They were laughing at his naivety, laughing at how he paid for every meal and every vacation while they lived out a romance at the expense of his soul. He looked at the timestamps. The physical shock made his stomach turn. He had to lean against the mahogany desk to keep from vomiting on the rug. The dates didn't go back weeks. They didn't go back months. The oldest files were from 20 years ago. 2 decades. 20 years of Evelyn kissing him in the morning, saying, "I love you," and then opening the door for David the moment Robert's car turned the corner. 20 years of David sitting on his sofa, drinking his whiskey, calling him brother, and then touching his wife. Robert's entire adult life, his entire marriage, was a calculated, monstrous facade. But the bottom hadn't been reached yet. There was a sub-basement to this hell. As his pale, trembling fingers swiped across the glass, he noticed a subfolder. It was labeled simply with one name, Mia. Robert's finger hovered over the screen. Every primal survival instinct in his body, every fiber of his human soul, screamed at him to drop that iPad, to smash it against the wall, to run out of the house, to drive as far as the road would take him and pretend he never walked into that room. Ignorance was a safe harbor. This truth was a bottomless abyss. If he clicked that folder, there was no coming back. He would never be the same man again. He tapped the screen. Inside was a scanned medical document from a reputable genetic lab, a DNA test. The date in the top corner was 22 years old, just months before Mia was born. Robert stared at the black and white text. The letters began to blur and dance before his wide eyes until they fused into the sentence that shattered his soul into a million jagged pieces. Probability of paternity, 0%. Attached were emails between Evelyn and David. David had been in a panic back then, saying he couldn't afford child support or the responsibility of a kid because the company was still starting out. Evelyn's reply was a coldness that froze Robert's blood. She wrote, "Robert is obsessed with me. He'll never doubt it. He's a good provider. Let him take the hit. Let him pay the bills. The girl will have the best health insurance, the best schools, and we both get to watch her grow up together without any of the heavy lifting. He will raise her for us." Have you ever felt a pain that goes beyond sadness? A pain that bypasses rage and hits a level of betrayal so absolute that it breaks the very mechanism in your brain that processes reality? Robert didn't cry. No tears fell. He didn't scream. He didn't reach for the phone to call a divorce lawyer or the police. Instead, something inside Robert's mind simply snapped. A wire was cut. A pure, total psychological blackout. The man who walked into that office minutes ago, the loving father, the devoted husband, the loyal friend, died in that leather chair. That person ceased to exist forever. A terrifying, hollow coldness took over every cell in his body. Something entirely different stood up from that desk. A force without empathy, without morality, and without regret. A human shell filled only with a blinding need for total annihilation. Robert wasn't shaking anymore. His breathing was slow, calm, almost robotic. He walked silently to the corner of the office, where an oil painting hid a wall safe. He punched in the code. The lock beeps were soft. The heavy steel door swung open. He didn't grab deeds or passports or cash. He reached for the small, heavy, semi-automatic handgun he kept there for home defense. He checked the magazine with mechanical precision. It was full. He tucked the cold steel into the waistband of his trousers, covering it with his expensive navy blazer. He left the office, closing the door quietly behind him. He walked slowly down the hallway and began his descent down the marble staircase. With every step, the illusion of his 25-year life dissolved like dust. He could hear the laughter from the garden getting louder. He could hear the elegant music playing. He stepped out onto the sunlit patio. The California heat hit his face, but he felt nothing. The world around him seemed to be moving in slow motion. He looked across the lawn. Evelyn saw him and flashed her most beautiful smile. That perfect, loving smile he had cherished for a quarter of a century. She gestured for him to come toward the small wooden stage set up for the speeches. And right there, standing next to her, with his arm casually leaning on her chair, was David. David was holding a champagne flute, laughing, clapping his hands, looking at Robert with the warm smile of a proud brother. The audacity of it. The pure, nauseating psychopathy of the two of them standing side by side, applauding the man they had systematically dismantled for 2 decades. Robert walked to the center of the lush green lawn. His steps were heavy but firm. He stopped in front of the microphone stand. The string quartet ended their piece with a flourish and went silent. The 100 guests realized it was time for the toast. The crowd quieted, the side conversations died out, and everyone turned their attention to the family patriarch. They raised their crystal glasses in anticipation of a heartwarming, emotional tribute. Robert looked at the silent crowd. He looked at his business associates, Evelyn's family, their wealthy neighbors. He looked at Mia. She was in the front row, wearing her white graduation dress, her eyes shining with expectation, a wide smile on her face as she looked at the man she called Dad. And then, Robert looked directly at Evelyn and David, who were just a few feet away. He adjusted the mic. When he began to speak, his voice didn't tremble. It was a monotone, deep, and terrifyingly calm. "Thank you all for being here today," Robert said, his voice echoing perfectly through the speakers across the silent garden. "I spent weeks thinking about what to say, thinking about the passage of time, about how things change, about how we build our lives around the people we love, and about the truth." The guest smiled, thinking his words were profound. He continued, his eyes now locked, burning into his wife's face. "Today, we came to celebrate my daughter's future. But before that, I want to make a very special toast to my beloved wife, Evelyn. I want to toast her for 25 years of an impeccable marriage. And I want to toast her and my best friend, David, for 20 years of absolute, filthy, unforgivable lies." The smile vanished from Evelyn's face instantly. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone let out a nervous laugh, thinking it was some kind of dark joke or an inside prank they didn't quite get. But Robert wasn't smiling. He gripped the microphone stand so hard his knuckles turned white. "You all think you know the perfect family," Robert said, his voice rising, gaining a sharp, dangerous edge. "You look at us and you see the American dream. But I just came from my office, and I saw the cloud folder on my wife's iPad." The color drained from Evelyn's face. She turned as pale as a corpse. The champagne glass in David's hand began to shake visibly. The silence in the crowd was now palpable, a suffocating, heavy horror that hung in the air. Robert detailed everything, amplified by the speakers so that the neighbors blocks away could hear. He listed the hotel names. He repeated the exact phrases from the messages where they mocked him. He exposed, in a methodical and humiliating fashion, the disgusting betrayal that took place while he worked to pay for the very champagne they were all drinking. The guests gasped. Women covered their mouths in pure shock. Men looked at David with disgust and bewilderment. Mia stepped forward, tears already streaming down her face. "Dad, what are you talking about? Stop it, you're scaring us." Robert turned his head toward the girl he had rocked to sleep, whose wounds he had healed, and whom he had loved with every ounce of his soul. His eyes were dead and hollow. "Mia," he said, his voice breaking for just a fraction of a second. "The man you call Uncle David, the man who bought your first car with my company's money, is your biological father. They planned this. They used me as a blood bank and a piggy bank for 22 years to support you and their affair." A strangled cry escaped Mia's throat. She covered her face and collapsed to her knees on the grass. Horror took over the garden. Evelyn began to sob hysterically. She stepped toward Robert, her hands outstretched, the 25-year mask finally shattered. "Robert, please, please, don't do this here. Let me explain. You don't understand." David, realizing the total public annihilation of his reputation and his secret, decided to intervene. He took on the persona of the controlling businessman he had always been. He raised his hands in a pacifying gesture, trying to manage the crisis as if it were just a bad board meeting. "Robert, David said, taking 2 steps forward, blocking Evelyn. His voice tried to sound reasonable, soothing. Man, you're having a breakdown. Put the mic down. Let's go inside. We are civilized men. We can handle this behind closed doors. Don't ruin the kids' party. The word civilized. It was the final spark in the gas tank of Robert's destroyed mind. There was nothing civilized left in Robert. There was no reason, no future, no humanity. Only absolute darkness. As David took a 3rd step toward him, reaching out to grab the microphone, Robert stepped back half a pace. His right hand blurred behind his blazer. In one fluid, instinctive motion, without a hint of hesitation, he drew the heavy black pistol. The people in the front rows saw the metallic glint. Panic exploded. A chorus of terrified screams ripped through the beautiful afternoon. Guests ran in blind desperation, knocking over tables. Crystal glasses smashed against the stone patio. Women in heels tripped and fell, scrambling for the exits. Evelyn let out a raw, primal shriek that didn't sound human. No! Robert didn't flinch. He didn't look at his wife. He didn't look at the panicking crowd. He looked directly into David's eyes. Into the eyes of the man who stole his wife, violated his home, stole his daughter's paternity, and stole his entire life. Robert raised the weapon. The sound of the shots cracked through the California afternoon like thunderclaps. 1, 2, 3. David was thrown back violently by the impact. He hit the manicured grass heavily, knocking over silver trays and glasses that rolled through the red-stained lawn. He didn't move again. The chaos in the garden was indescribable. Mass hysteria, guests leaping over hedges, the sound of heels pounding on asphalt, children crying. Evelyn threw herself onto the ground, crawling on her knees to David's body, clutching his blazer with trembling hands, wailing in a deafening agony, the blood ruining her perfect red silk dress. Mia, still on the ground, hugged her own legs, rocking back and forth in catatonic shock, crying uncontrollably. And Robert? Robert just stood there. The gun still trailed a wisp of invisible smoke in his lowered hand. The violent fury seemed to have left his body with the bullets, leaving behind only an empty shell. He didn't try to run. He didn't cry. He turned his back on Evelyn's screams and his best friend's body. He walked slowly toward one of the heavy white iron patio chairs that had been abandoned in the rush. He sat down. He placed the black pistol carefully on the glass-top table, next to a bowl of uneaten strawberries. He folded his hands in his lap, crossed his legs, and stared out at the crystal-clear, still water of the infinity pool, where the reflection of the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon. He listened to the police sirens beginning to howl in the distance, getting louder and faster as they climbed the Hollywood hills. He sat there in complete, devastating silence, surrounded by the blood-soaked ruins of the perfect lie he called a life. Robert was arrested at the scene without resistance. Because of the public nature of the crime, the dozens of high-profile witnesses, and the cell phone footage from the guests who escaped, the trial was short, brutal, and splashed across every tabloid. Robert was sentenced to life in prison. But the truth is, Robert's life had ended hours before the shots were fired, upstairs, alone in that office, in front of an iPad screen. Evelyn was left with absolutely nothing. Ostracized by her elite social circle, publicly shamed on a national level, and despised by Mia, who cut off all contact after the trauma of burying her biological father. The adulterous widow was forced to sell the estate to pay legal debts, condemned to spend the rest of her days wandering alone, isolated and hated by everyone who once called her a friend. Karma didn't come subtly. It came in front of 100 people and collected the final price for the worst betrayal possible. The absolute price for 20 years of lies. True crime story.